focus right now is going to be to help decode what has changed for investors as well as for personal investors and taxpayers. There's a lot of buzz when it comes to real estate, with people questioning the removal of indexation. Pardon me this very complex term if you have not heard it, but this may have far-reaching consequences if you have your eye on real estate, or if your loved ones, your family members, your father or mother or anybody at some point has gifted you with love a property. Indexation is essentially an adjustment of the original value of an asset, like an ancestral home, against the current inflation. This has been removed for now, dividing people quite a bit. But it isn't as simple as that. We're also being told, while the finance minister did say that this is being removed, there are others who have pointed out that this is being given to people with two options. One with the option of indexation and the other without it. But for now, let me go across to my colleague Ashish, who will break this down for us. So Ashish, if I had bought a property of say 1 lakh rupees in 2010, what changes now after this indexation has been dropped?
Absolutely. Sneha, a very interesting question that, and it's very important to use these basic figures so that our viewers can also understand what really changes for them, because this is something that really is going to affect the real estate market. Now, for example, if a person had bought a land under the first, I'll explain the old rules. Now, under the old rules, if a person had bought a land for 1 lakh rupees, and that was, of course, something he sold for 3 lakh rupees, now there would be some certain, certain component that he would be taxed as far as the capital gains are concerned. But the interesting thing here is that he would probably have a particular sort of an adjustment, a CII, which is the cost inflation index, which is something which is basically a component that is added to the original price, so that the original price is adjusted according to the inflation. And then at the end, when you look at the original price and also the sale price, the difference between them is very less, and the tax which the person pays basically is also less, or pretty much there is no tax. Now, this is of course the benefit that real estate investors were getting, the fact that they were actually not paying any tax on all of these capital gains, because of the fact that their original price was inflated, keeping in mind the inflation over the years. But now what the government has done is they've basically taken out this particular benefit from the real estate investor. So what it now means that at the end of the day, when you sell a land, for example, something that you had bought for 1 lakh rupees, now you sell it for 3 lakh rupees, 2 lakh is what is going to be considered as the total amount, and there's going to be a long-term capital gain, for example, 12.5% on that 2 lakh rupees. So the earlier benefit that investors used to get, keeping the inflation in mind, the inflation-related benefit is not going to be there anymore for real estate investors, and also for investors who are getting basically this indexation benefit. So this is a big blow for a lot of investors, and of course the markets are now reacting sharply to this as well, especially the investors who are now saying that on one hand the government continues to claim that it wants to encourage investors. On the other hand, the removal of indexation benefit is going to affect the market, is also going to affect the investor confidence, and is also of course sending out a wrong signal to the investors that on one hand, of course, earlier they could save a lot of money given the fact that there was indexation benefit on the capital gains as far as real estate is concerned. But now, on the other hand, there's absolutely no benefit. In fact, they will not just have to pay tax, but pay a lot of it because of the fact that the CII, which is the cost inflation index, which was used against the original pricing to inflate it, to bring the capital gain lower, that has also been removed. So not very good signs for investors, especially as far as the real estate sector is concerned.
Well, thank you very much, Ashish, for breaking this down for us. But one very quick question, Ashish. So do I need to be worried if my father or my mother has gifted me something in terms of a property? Do I need to be worried, yes or no? Or do I have a chance of maneuvering around this? Or should I go to an expert for this?
Well, I mean, if you don't mind really paying a certain amount of tax to the government that earlier you wouldn't have, yes, you have to be worried a little because of the fact that the government now has hands in your pocket, even as far as this investment is concerned. So a sign of a worry there for investors. But again, the government is claiming that they're doing a lot for the investors. So some sort of a relief could be expected. But at least as of now, the government has its hands in your pockets as far as this investment is concerned. So yeah, I think you have to be a little worried about this investment.
Ashish, thank you very much for breaking this down. In fact, I'm being joined by Monika Halan as well, the author for Let's Talk Money. But before I go to her, very quickly, short-term capital gains were taxed at 10%. Now it's at 12.5%. Long-term capital gains that were taxed at 15%. Now it's 20%. Both figures have seen a hike. The new tax regime has once again been revamped. In fact, it's been seeing a lot of impetus for that matter, with the hope that more and more taxpayers switch to it. As per the revised new tax regime, income up to 3 lakhs will not be taxable, similar to how it was in the new tax regime. The difference is seen in the tax slab. Earlier, those earning between 3 to 6 lakh had to pay 5% tax, but now that ranges 3 to 7 lakhs. Further on, the tax on 7 to 10 lakh range is 10%, 10 to 12 lakh is 15%, and 12 to 15 lakh is 20%, and 15 lakh and above is 30%. The deduction of employers' expenditure towards the NPS has also been increased from 10% to 14% of a salary. Now, to make sense of all of this, I'm being joined at this point by Monika Halan. Thank you very much for joining us. There are so many questions that I would like to start off with, but first, as we were discussing with my colleague, how big is this entire talk around indexation? Because many would say in East Asian countries, particularly if you look at a country like India, gifting or transfer of gifts has been very crucial. Within the family has been a token of love, and not just a token of love, it's even been beyond more than that. It's about memories, it's about culture, it's about heritage, it's about all of that for a family, for an individual. Now, how should an average Indian really look at this particular case with respect to indexation and the taxes which may have to be paid or not? Some even saying this is a backdoor entry of inheritance tax. How far-fetched, inaccurate or accurate is that?
I think we need to look at this in the context of rationalizing the capital gains infrastructure. The entire regime of capital gains is very messy right now, where you have different assets, you have equity, you have debt, you have real estate, you have gold. They all are taxed differently depending on the form in which you hold it. The time in which it goes long term and short term also differs. The rates also differ, and it matters whether you hold it physically or through a financial product. So the way that it looks to me is the government is trying to rationalize this, make one set of rules for all assets, so that whether you're holding an equity or a debt or a piece of real estate or gold, you face the same tax system. So I think it's a step in that direction where where real estate is being brought at par with equity. So both have. So there's been a rate change for equity in terms of the long-term capital gains tax. Now it's 12 and a half. Real estate has seen a cut in this tax from 20 to 12 and a half. But that benefit of indexation has been taken away, which means that you cannot inflation index the buying price. So there will be an outgo of tax when you sell your real estate. So look, the big picture is that you need a cleaner tax system on assets. As the country grows in its economic journey, you will have more and more people creating assets. So you need to have a tax regime which doesn't give you a tax arbitrage between holding different asset classes. So I think we should see it in that context, that it's trying to make it neutral as to what asset you hold.
No, so are you then saying that those who may have inheritance or those who may have gifts like this may have to pay higher taxes, and it will not be stabilized against the current rate of inflation? Is this how it's supposed to be looked at?
So on that gifting and inheritance part, I think, a closer read of the fiscal bill will have to be done. I think we will need to spend a little, so I don't want to take a position on that at all, on the inheritance part and on the gifting part,
Sure.
because that's a separate thing. But let's just look at somebody who's investing in real estate and that person is flipping the property after a few
Hmm.
years. For that person, the rules are very clear. Now, when you bring in gifting and inheritance, it's a different thing altogether. And I think for that, at least I would want to
True.
read the finance bill before I take a position. But should that be the case, then you are right. Then this is a wealth tax through the back door, inheritance tax, not wealth tax, but inheritance tax a little bit through the back door, where
Correct.
the gifting part will attract a tax. So, but I will park that for the moment till I read the document for myself.
Okay. Another question that I have to ask you is this long-term capital gains. When we are talking about the changes in tax with respect to the long-term capital gain, is it unfairly taxing those who may be salaried and in the upper middle class bracket? That's one question everybody is asking.
I get your question, but if you look at the budgets of this government, look at the policy statements of this government, there is a very clear view to tax the well off so that there is money to redistribute. And that has been a consistent story. I mean, look, we've seen the marginal tax rate, which means that what is your highest tax slab? That today is at 39% in the new tax regime. That's very high because of the surcharge. So if you're over 50 lakh, the surcharge starts and then it progressively gets higher and higher so that by the time you reach an income, I think, of 5 crore a year, you're paying 39% marginal tax. And then when you look at the way assets are taxed, the income from the asset is taxed, the short and the long term profits are taxed. So there is a view that inherently it's a very the skew of the population number is towards the poorer section. There is a small section which does well. The attempt of the government is to tax them. We can debate on the fact that we feel it is not fair, but we also are very well off in what is essentially a very poor country. So whose voices are not heard on these channels. So I am very far from being a leftist. I am more on the right side of the debate. But if you see it from the government's point of view, where you have to balance different commitments that are made even during elections or during when you run a government, I would look at it in that context. So yes, we feel squeezed, but the only antidote to this is more growth. The only thing which can happen is that you pull up the rest of the people who are behind, and that can only happen through growth, which gives jobs, which allows incomes to rise. So in that context, yes, you do feel it is very unfair. You pay the taxes, you pay the GST, which the person who's not taxed is not paying. You pay taxes on your capital gains, your assets, your income from your assets. So you feel very heavily taxed. And then when you see things like urban infrastructure, you look at the mess that the cities are in. You look at this. You look at the public health system. You look at the education system. Then you feel what is happening to the money. But I think again, in the backdrop of 60% of the country being extremely poor in 1980 and that number dropping to about 5%, all I can tell
Mm.
you is that we're on a path of growth. It is going to be painful for the people who are better off. That's all.
Better off, Monika Halan, is a very relative term. You may be better off than me, but I may be better off than someone else, and my better off may really not be that tangible in comparison to you being better off than me. And that's often the story of the middle class in India. And one of the things that they really are asking, what's there for me in this budget?
I agree with you. The tinkering with the tax slabs is very, very marginal, and the benefit has gone to really the people on the lower end of the scale. So there is a little bit of benefit on standard deduction. But I think the middle class was expecting a little more this year. I have to tell you that I think very patiently they have borne the entire thing of COVID, and after that, the taxes. Everyone's tightened their belt. They've done all of that. I think this year there was a little bit of because they had the fiscal space in the sense that tax revenues are up.
Hmm.
RBI gave that large bonus transfer which happened, tax. You don't know path of fiscal consolidation. So there was a feeling that this budget there is a little bit of money to give the middle class a helping hand, and that I think has not really happened. There's a tinkering, and I can just hope that there is a full budget ahead. So this is really half a year's budget. We had one in Feb, now in July. The February budget 2025, we can only hope that something a little more is done for the middle class because they are hurting.
That's true. That's true, Monika Halan. And irrespective of which side of the politics one comes from, that's a reality that one would have to answer while explaining the budget to the viewers who are watching. Ms. Monika, if I can also ask you one more question, and let's move away from all these questions that are, the larger picture to something which is very minute. Again, viewers are asking this question. So should we rush to the new tax slab, the new tax regime, and shun the old tax regime? It's a complicated question to ask depending upon where your
That's right.
apples are, but nonetheless, a huge push to the new tax regime, and that was expected. But how should viewers be looking at this?
I think talk to your CA, see what works for you. Each person will have a different answer depending on which part of the income scale you are at. I would imagine that a lot of the benefits really do come to people in the lower part of the income gradation. But I think the best answer would be to talk to your CA and see which works for you. Typically, today, the CAs are giving you two sets of numbers: what you're taxed in the old and what you're taxed in the new. And that answer becomes clear for you. But you're right. The government is nudging, they are pushing people towards the new tax system, new tax regime, and you will see more and more benefits coming only here. So if it works for you this year, you're seeing lower taxes on the new, then you have to shift because that is where the government wants you to go.
It's interesting you say that because that's where you want the government to go. And I have another question to that. I'll come to that in a bit. But Ms. Monika, there's also a lot which is said about getting women into the workforce. And your book obviously says about living the life that you dream without getting into the trap of the right investment, so and so. But do you really think, besides the talk that has been done and a larger messaging and using the word of women into workforce, adding them on and all of that, the budget really has a focus on women? Do you think that?
I think there are some proposals specific to women in terms of creches, in terms of working women's hostels. I think the deeper problem has to be solved by the states. It really becomes a security of women issue. The streets have to be safe. It should be safe to work at night. And there is something that the budget cannot solve, which is where the Indian household comes into play, where a lot of them like the income that she brings, but she doesn't like her going out for work. So that unfortunate philosophy has to change, where the entire household has to participate in her going out to work and supporting her with household work. So those are societal issues, and I would put a lot of pressure on the state governments to make cities safe. So twin issues of a household which loads both housework as well as work outside the home. Why do you think women drop out the minute there is a child born? Because the work is too much. There is no support. So if the household wants the income, they need to support her when she goes out to work.
That's true. And often, unfortunately, it's also a trade-off between who has the higher income in the family. That also becomes an unfortunate trade-off in most houses. But Monika Halan, my last question to you, and as I said, I have many more questions to ask you, but you are also very tight on time, I'm sure. Ms. Monika, to viewers who are looking at what we are discussing, who are looking at budget shows across and trying to understand, particularly the middle class, are they better off or are they worse off? There was this conversation that we were privy to, and there were some people saying that we are just paying so much of taxes, it's just as if they are telling us to go abroad. How would you react to people making such kind of statements?
It is not as if abroad. You will escape the taxes. And honestly, if you hear some of the stories of the Western medical systems, so if you are depending on public health in Europe or in the US or wherever, so you can, if you have your private insurance, it's a different story. But if you're dependent on public health, which is very similar to if you're dependent on public health in India, you have a different life. And if you have private healthcare, you have a different life. The cost of the private healthcare in India is far lower than what you will pay abroad. So, yes, the state provides the healthcare services out of your taxes, but the average wait time to see the doctor may be 3 weeks or 6 months. You don't know what. So, for a lot of things, you're better off here. So, you cannot escape the taxes. And what comes with that, of course, will be things like clean air,
Despite the
water.
GST,
Those are
even
things
on
which,
health.
but just this healthcare issue, I think we are people who can pay for their own healthcare, and most of the middle class can, and they do. You have your doctor on WhatsApp here. Try doing that in Europe.
All right. Monika Halan, thank you very much for this very interesting conversation and hope to have you more often here to discuss this. Thank you very much, Ms. Monika Halan, for sharing your insights into this.